Welcome to Bake This Book. My name's Erik Fabian. I'm a home baker and co-founder of Sourhouse. Today, we're going to be talking with cookbook authors, folks who focus on naturally fermented sourdough breads and pastries. We're going to talk about their books, how they were made, the recipes inside, and tips for making your next bake a really great bake. Here we go. Hey bakers, it's holiday time, and I'm excited for the cookbooks that I'm going to be giving and receiving this year. I was updating the Sourhouse baking gift guide that we share every year, and I was adding cookbooks to it for the first time. And I started getting curious about what other bakers have on their list this year. So I reached out to a couple baker educators that I respect, and I thought we'd discuss, what sourdough cookbooks are on the top of our gift list for this year. So I have two bakers with me. First up, Andra from Sourdough Explained. Welcome, Andra.
Hi, Erik. Thank you for having me. Excited for this.
And also Brandon from Sourdough Brandon. How are you doing, Brandon?
I'm well, Erik. Thanks for having me.
Hey, welcome. We all talk to a lot of bakers. You both are also educators. You do live classes, Andra in London, Brandon in Massachusetts, and around the region, as well as online. And, I think that of anybody I know, this group probably has the ability to kind of understand both what a beginner baker is thinking about and also somebody with more experience. So I'm really excited to talk about the kind of cookbooks that are going to be the perfect fit for whoever's on your gift list this year. But first, just to kind of set the tone, Andra, what makes a good cookbook for you?
Well, I think it's a mix of recipes, of course, because everyone is looking after recipes in a cookbook. This is what they expect, but also a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of understanding of the process that goes behind. I think it's nice when you have clear expectations before you get started with the recipes on what's the outcome, but also what we expect out of the process. So a mix of both.
Cool. And Brandon, what about you?
Yeah, I think I'm all of those things as well. I love learning new techniques from different bakers and hearing their stories and their background and just how everyone approaches sourdough baking a little bit differently. And then also just the way that I write recipes is making sure that ingredients are accessible and so that people can easily remake recipes with certain ingredients over and over again. And so that's something that I also look forward to in cookbooks is, things that I can find in my pantry to make, and then maybe also some specialty ingredients that I can invest in one time that then I can remake over and over again.
Yeah, totally. It makes sense. I think I find myself reading cookbooks more than cooking from them. I look for ideas to get started with, but I tend to be a rather loosey-goosey baker like I am a cook. And so, I love cookbooks and they're often a starting point. And it's so interesting to kind of understand the people that are behind the books through their work. So I've got a list of questions for different kinds of bakers. And so let's just dig into it. Brandon, I'll start with you.
Okay.
So imagine you're in the kitchen standing next to a new baker, particularly a Swiftie. Because we all know when Taylor Swift announced that she was baking a great deal and just totally geeking out on sourdough bread, it set not only the sourdough world aflutter with excitement, but many of her fans, I imagine, are now exploring sourdough baking for the first time. And you created my very favorite funfetti recipe on the internet shortly after. So good job there.
I did, yes.
So I feel like you have some sort of psychic understanding of what that Swiftie is looking for. So what cookbook would you pull out of the shelf and offer to this new baker if you were standing next to them as they're preparing to kind of make their first loaf of bread?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different cookbooks out there. And like I said a little bit earlier, I think that everyone approaches sourdough and bread baking and just baking in general very differently. And I try to write my recipes to be really, really detailed with lots of photos of every single step. So then if there's a new baker or maybe even a more advanced baker, when they're following the recipes, they can get all their questions answered. And I'm offering lots of tips and guidance through that. And cookbooks have a little bit less space sometimes to be able to do that. So I do think for beginner bakers, you want to be inspired by recipes and just flipping through, even if you go to your local library and you just go to like a book section and flip through pages of like what's inspiring to you and what makes you excited to bake. I think that that's such a big component of it, because you do not want to be overwhelmed. And I think it's really easy to be overwhelmed by just the amount of resources that are available for sourdough bakers now. One that I bring to my educational in-person workshops, these are mostly at libraries that I do how to make and maintain and store a sourdough starter, and attendees usually get to leave with sourdough starter at the end of that as well, so they can get to baking. One book that I bring with me is The Big Book of Bread from King Arthur. I think that it's really accessible, and the way that they write the recipes is just really appealing for new bakers. It has a mix of sourdough and yeasted recipes, so as someone maybe is a little intimidated to start with sourdough, I think it's a really great kind of jumping off point to even make just yeasted bread recipes, because that can be a little bit less intimidating for some people. I often say that, patience is like the one ingredient in sourdough baking that we don't talk about enough. And so for a lot of people, and maybe the new Swifties or so, they may not realize how long it takes like a regular loaf of sourdough bread to ferment. And even though most of that is hands off, that amount of time, they may be overwhelmed by the schedules, or they may think that they don't have the time in their lives to do something like that. But I'm like, if Taylor Swift can do it and she's so busy, any home bakers can make it work with their schedules as well. So I think that book from King Arthur is a really good starting off point that has some really interesting recipes to get people excited to bake.
Nice. King Arthur, a classic source of baking knowledge, both in print and online. Andra, same question to you. You're in the kitchen, standing next to that Swiftie. This is the hardest question, I have to say, because there are so many books for beginner bakers, and it's like sort of an obligation, I feel like, if you're publishing a cookbook, especially your first cookbook, to speak to that 101 information. But what do you recommend to somebody looking for a gift for this Swiftie new baker this year?
Well, I have one book I've started with, and I would always recommend it to anyone starting with sourdough baking. As I said earlier, for me, it's not just the recipe. Even if you're at the beginning, I think you need to know what to expect. And I think you need to know what to expect, especially when you change ingredients, because big bakers live in different environments in different countries, and they have access to different flour in the end, right? So whenever someone is writing a recipe, they are writing everything. Everything is based on what they have access to, their environment, their starter, their everything. And the moment you try to replicate, especially as a beginner, the moment you try to replicate that in your own home with your own flour and your own starter and your own technique, which is not there yet, you may end up disappointed. So for me, it's a mix of, yes, recipes are important, but also explaining a little bit and setting up the scene beforehand, so that that beginner knows what to expect. And even when I teach people here in my home in London, I'm showing them a recipe and I'm teaching them a recipe, but I always tell them, look, if you change the flours, the recipe is changing. So the book that I always recommend to people, which could be a little bit overwhelming when you read it first time, when you just start, but I think it also sets the scene. It's The Sourdough School from Vanessa Kimball, which I respect. And that was the book I started with, but I have to be honest that I went back to it over years, like over the last 6 years, and I read it many times with different eyes and a different understanding of what she's trying to say.
Wow. So it's a classic, I think, among bakers, but also something that's a gift that keeps on giving. So it's a great investment.
It is a great investment, yes.
For a new baker.
Yes.
That's great. So it'll be with you your whole sourdough journey. Yeah, it's tough. I have to figure out the right kind of level for a new baker. And my recommendation is not my typical recommendation, particularly because I'm trying to think about this Swiftie and what Taylor Swift tends to bake, or what she's talked about baking. And so I actually am going to toss into the pile here Amy Coyne's new book. I spoke with her in an earlier podcast. She put out The Beginner's Guide to Sourdough. She really convinced me, in terms of like a very beginner focused kind of book that I thought was organized super well for the beginner, with different sections that go from your very first basic loaf to adding more ideas and more techniques in, and particularly inclusions. And I think of like what we understand as the Taylor Swift bread right now is like a bread with inclusions. It's kind of fun. So I think Amy's book is a good path into that. Now let's think about the baker who has baked a few loaves and, has some experience, but is looking to level up their game. And, maybe you are the person in that baker's life who's been enjoying their bread and has been benefiting from this kind of new passion of theirs, and you want to encourage it because you want to eat more bread, if nothing else. Andra, I'll go back to you. So once you've got those first loaves under your belt and you're just trying to figure out what's next, where do you send people? Like, what kind of cookbook would be another good present for this person?
Well, if you have no book yet, no sourdough book yet, I still believe that the Sourdough School from Vanessa Kimball is the right gift.
Is that your answer for every question? Like,
yes, it is. That was the plan. I wanted to keep things. I wanted to keep things very easy on my side. So yes, it's still that. No,
Andra
no.
is you're a minimalist, and her bookshelf consists of free books.
Actually, I have quite plenty of books, and I have even books from bakeries in London, and their approach is quite easy. So probably that would be, one for beginners. But let's leave that. No, but I genuinely believe that the Sourdough School book, it would work for an intermediate. Let's call it that. But also, I have 2 other books I love, actually. Different approaches, different stories behind, people based in different countries in the end. So one is the tartine bread, which everyone knows, like not everyone at the beginning of the journey, but I'm sure at some point, sooner or later, everyone would hear about tartine and the tartine method. And the other one is the Richard Hart bread.
And how would you describe the difference of approaches between Richard Hart and Chad Robertson in those books? Like, what do you think they offer differently?
Yeah, I think Richard Hart is very much down to earth, to be honest. And I don't know, you get the good feeling that it's an easy process and everyone can make it. And I was very encouraged by that. I mean, to be honest, I don't think it's for a beginner. Could work for a beginner as well, but definitely for someone who has just started making sourdough bread and they are not as happy with what they get or they want to improve. I think Richard Hart has a really down-to-earth approach and everyone can make it. Like I also tell people, if I can make it, everyone can make it. Yes, you need patience and you need to bake more and you need to make more bread to get better at it. But I also think that Richard Hart is quite, the guy that can encourage you through his book and through his story. So that's what I like.
If your baker friend, is feeling a little anxiety, a little unsure what they're doing, Richard Hart is the way to go.
Absolutely.
But if you want to give somebody path into the central discussion of sourdough baking today, something to create very aspirational, beautiful breads, tartine is a good option as well. I'm going to jump in and just say, toss in mine for this one, because like you mentioned, any of these books typically cross over for different types of bakers, any good book. And tartine is actually the one that's most often I recommend as a first book for everybody. And I'm going to bring it into this list here as well. But I'm going to pair it with another book by my friend Jonathan Stevens, who I also spoke with earlier this season. His Hungry Ghost bread book, I think, is really cool. And both of these books, I think, Tartine, as well as the Hungry Ghost bread book, I like it for that slightly experienced baker because one, they both have a certain romance about it. They talk about it's like the professional baker's view, the professional baker in their kitchen working, also a well-earned authority on their perspective on bread, but also how those books are both laid out. They both start from one central recipe that is explained in pretty good detail over quite a number of pages. And then there's variations on it. And so you kind of go from that basic bread and you can go different ways. And I think that is really one of the ways that people really start to own bread baking is when you feel like you can kind of improvise in the kitchen and you understand baker's math and you can kind of make adjustments and that sort of thing in general. So Brandon, let me go to you now. Same question. For that baker who's got a few bread bakes under their belt and are thinking of their game, what would you suggest to give to this kind of baker?
Yes. So one that I really like is The Perfect Loaf by Maurizio Leo. I think that his book really goes into a lot of detail on the science behind bread baking. He gives lots of different techniques and tips throughout. And I also really like that he has a detailed schedule and like all of the kind of graphs to kind of understand how temperature is so important in sourdough baking. And that's something that maybe a lot of beginner books don't touch on. I think Andrew mentioned a little bit about it earlier, but just kind of how every environment is a little bit different. And I think that his book really goes into detail about how important temperature is as an essentially an ingredient in your recipes. And so I think that book does a really good job for maybe those who are really wanting to kind of hone in the process of their sourdough baking and not just make like a good loaf, but make like even better loaf, and understanding why every bake may be a little bit different, even from day to day, just based on your environment. And especially here in in New England, where the weather can change on a whim and be sunny summer day to winter cold in 24 hours. I think that for me, that was really a game changer in understanding how important temperature is and how that fluctuates and how it affects your baking. And he really goes into that in a little bit more detail that I think a lot of intermediate bakers will find helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and has a great section on mixing, I think, in the up front, and is very detailed to the point where sometimes I feel like just round the numbers. It's just like round off the numbers in Mauricio. I'm like, it doesn't need to be 257 grams, but for somebody who wants that feeling of precision, I totally hear you.
I'm with you, Erik, on that one. I mean,
Yeah.
I know I know I'm jumping ahead, but for me, The Perfect Loaf, actually, it is a great book. And I have to say, when I started my journey in 2019, there was not much out there on social media, right?
No.
And I'm so grateful for that, because now it's so confusing and so, there's too much almost. We are at the point where it's too much out there and too many opinions. And if you are a Swiftie just starting with it, you don't know which direction to take, and you don't know.
Exactly.
Yes, like the poor Swifties. But when I started, I obviously had the Sourdough Cookbook, as I said, but the other source I used was actually his blog, the Perfect Loaf blog, because there was no book at that point, and it helped me a lot in my journey. The book is great, but I do reckon that it's more for the advanced. I was surprised to hear Brandon saying that it's for the intermediate, because if you have a few loaves under your belt, and let's say you're baking for 6 months, the Perfect Loaf can still be overwhelming. It's great for the upfront bit. I think what you said, Brandon, because it's explaining things, and there are all those graphs and all those pictures and everything. I think it's great from this point of view. But then when you get to the recipes, reading the baker's percentages and the way he looks at the recipe can be quite tough.
It can be intimidating for some people, which I think is, that's why I think I recommended the King Arthur, the Big Book of Bread, to just kind of be the introduction. But for me, like, it's funny to hear you all say that it's a lot. Whereas for me, I'm someone that, like, I love putting Legos together or following the IKEA instructions to a T. Like, I love doing that. And so for me, like, following and having the exact amount of times and detailed, temperatures, and being like, at 78 degrees Fahrenheit, this is going to take 4.5 hours. Like, for me, that's really helpful. And maybe when we get into the advanced cookbooks, maybe mine will be.
It brings up a great point. It's like, there are also many different personalities of bakers out there. And I think Mauricio has always targeted his baker really well with this idea of the perfect loaf. It's like somebody's looking for perfection, wants to refine it, wants to do every step and know every little bit.
And I think that's why the subtitle is like the craft and science behind sourdough baking, because he really gets into the science behind it and how it's more than just necessarily like mixing flour and water together and seeing what happens. Like, he gets a little bit more into detail for that. But I think that's a great point, that it's like, it kind of, you can approach sourdough baking in so many different ways. And I think that's what also makes it fun and makes it an art for so many people.
Totally. And I'm more of an advocate for like the good enough loaf, especially for bringing more people into baking. And
absolutely.
And there's probably books that are more for that person than the Perfect Loaf. But eventually I think you appreciate it all. And the Perfect Loaf is another one that like keeps on giving, I think, over time, and can speak to a lot of different levels as you advance. And if you have a question about a certain stage of a baking process, like it's a good reference for a lot of stuff as well. Well, let's talk about that more experienced baker now. And in my mind, how I frame this up is, this is the grandma that taught you to bake, or your parent that taught you to bake. Somebody's been doing it for 20 years. They've seen the trends come and go. They have their ways of working, but are still curious and still like to learn. So what would you toss out there to inspire somebody who thinks they've seen it all? I'll go back to you, Brandon. So what do
Sure.
you have for this as a gift for this person?
Yeah, so there's a newer book by Daniel Leader, who is a baker at Bread Alone in Rhinebeck, and I think another location in New York. But he has a Slow Rise, which is one of his new cookbooks, mostly about sourdough bread. It has some other yeasted bread in there, but I think that his story is just really compelling. He has a lot of anecdotes for every single recipe, which I really love hearing all of that perspective. And he just has a wealth of experience that's one I think that you could pick up and just learn something new from every single time. Also, I really like that he has a focus on different grains and ways to use some other wheat flours and other non-wheat flours that maybe other books don't touch on. So for example, he has like a fermented chickpea loaf made with like chickpea flour. He has some made with like other wheats and grains that maybe people aren't as familiar with. And I think that that's a really great starting point for the advanced baker who maybe has a mill and has maybe invested in that to start milling their own flour. He has like 100% whole wheat loaves and some other really great freshly milled recipes in there. He also has really detailed recipes on how to make yeasted and sourdough baguettes and croissants. So just like a little bit more detailed recipes that, come with a lot of experience. But I think that that's something where you can learn a lot from like an advanced baker who is making some pretty advanced techniques with his breads. And for the home baker, you can just learn so much from someone that's been doing it for a really long time. So I think that that's a really good one for advanced bakers that is pretty new too.
Yeah, I think that's great. I do an interview with Dan, and we talk about the book. And one thing I really appreciated from speaking with him is like he loves France. He was very inspired by France, and his story goes back to the 90s. He's been writing books forever. And so for somebody who's been baking that long, and maybe it's gone along with the transitions of bread from like this sort of European import to kind of how it exists now, Dan can take you on that whole journey, and then also has a real updated view on some of the traditional breads that people might want to bake. So yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, and he has like desserts like tarts and cookies and other things that he bakes in his house. And I think all of those types of recipes can also help you become a better baker or bread baker overall as well.
Yeah, and it's like sort of a history of baking, especially in the Northeast of the United States, like how bread culture has evolved over the last like 20 or so years. Andra, what about you?
You've made me curious about the book that you just talked about.
Now this is working. Things are going good now.
Yeah, I need to put it on my Christmas list, basically.
I have it right here.
Brilliant. Send it over.
Okay.
Look, I can put it. Yeah, it's on my list now. Look, I think I've already obviously mentioned a little bit about it. The perfect loaf that I think it's for the advanced. For me, it's definitely for the advanced. It's I don't know if it's for the person that has been making bread for 30 years, because I think they have a very strong opinion on what their approach is, to be honest, but you can always get some inspiration. I think you can get inspiration from any book. I think at that point, and you'll find snippets of information that you can translate into your way of doing things, into your method, into your approach. And actually, this is also what I do. I buy a book and I read the method and the story and the approach to it. And then I'm trying to adjust things to see if I can make better bread. But it's not always about the recipes, but it's about, like Brandon also said, understanding the different flours to work with and diving into more whole wheat and ancient grains and how to approach those. So I don't know what that book would be, to be honest. I think Vanessa in the sourdough school also has different recipes with different grains, which I think is great. So that's why I think it, works for everyone in a very nice way. There is actually a book. It's not a cookbook, but it's a book about flour. Actually, it's called Flour, which I always talk about whenever I teach people, because it gives you a little hint about the various flours, from the common wheat to ancient grains to non-wheat flours and to gluten-free flours like chickpea flour. You have all sorts of flour in there, but it gives you recipes as well, what you can do with those flours, but also it gives you a good understanding of what should I be expecting from this flour rather. So I think it's not a cookbook, but I think it's a great book for those who have been baking for a long time and want to understand more about what they work with actually and how they can change and improve or make different breads.
Great point. I'm kind of with you on that idea. I think that for the person who has baked for a long time, talking about different flours is a good way to approach it. So I spoke with Erin Goyaga about the art of gluten-free bread this season, and she is a pastry chef who got into sourdough baking. And I feel like this is the first real reference like tome for gluten-free baking, for bread baking that exists. But even for the maybe you're getting older and you're having some health issues, you want to try gluten-free, this would be your, good guide for it. But I think even for those of us who are not gluten-free ourselves or baking for gluten-free people and want that in our repertoire, that's good too. But also if you just want to understand how some of these non-glutinous flours work and how they might work together, I feel like this is an interesting picture into that. And she covers some pastries and stuff as well. Also, a more gluten-y kind of take on that path. The other book I would recommend is Southern Ground by Jennifer Lapidus, who is in my region here in North Carolina in the south of the United States. She has a grain mill that provides flours to a lot of bakeries in the region. And she's really somebody who kind of pioneered kind of like harder wheats that could grow in this kind of like southern Appalachia, southern environment, and like it's created an ecosystem in a lot of ways. And her book is really an interesting picture of both a lot of the bakeries, because it's almost like more of a collection or like an edited collection where she took recipes from various bakers that she knows who use her flours and then sort of reworked them for her book and made them her own a little bit. But there's a lot of rye in there. Like she uses like a Desm style starter. So she talks about that a little bit. And then there's some great sweets that use fresh milled flour, but it's just like the idea of like how you use like a fresh flour, a locally milled flour, how you think about like taking out the extractions of the brand and so sort of thing. That's really great. So yeah, I would say either The Art of Gluten-Free Bread or The Southern Ground would be my nominations for this category, for this kind of person. We can't talk about sourdough bread without talking about pizza. And I don't even know, I kind of threw this on the list because I don't even know how much pizza you all do. But for me, I feel like, why wouldn't you do pizza if you're going to bake bread? And also for all the pizza geeks out there who are trying to think about how do they like upgrade flavor in what they do, sourdough is the easiest path to making it better. So I'll toss it to you, Brandon. Again, when you talk to a pizza maker, what are you recommending?
Yeah, so Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast by Ken Forkish is a classic. He's been doing it for a really long time. It has really great recipes for bread, some with instant yeast, some with sourdough, but he also has pizza shop where he has pizza that he's making, and there's a whole pizza chapter with different doughs and then also different ways to make it. So he has like a cast iron skillet pizza, he has focaccia style pizza, he has the pizza stone, so based on different types of equipment that you have. And then I also like that there's like a same day pizza dough, there's like the overnight, there's one made with a levain or like sourdough, and then also one with a poulish, so you have different flavors and why these doughs act a little bit differently. And then has a whole section on sauce and toppings and just interesting ingredients that you can add to your pizzas. So I think that is a really good holistic understanding of just making sourdough pizza at home. But I know that there are lots of different books on pizza making, and that would just be kind of a starting point for a lot of pizza bakers. But I think it's a good one because it has different approaches for home bakers based on the equipment that you need. Because I'm always telling people like you don't have to get a really expensive tool or equipment to make pizza at home. You can do it in a sheet pan. You can make focaccia style pizza and it will taste delicious. You don't have to have, a fancy outdoor pizza oven to make like Neapolitan style pizza.
Yeah. And that's another very popular entrance way into baking in general. And then also I know Ken Forkish has, if you want to go further with pizza with him, I think he has one called like Elements of Pizza that a lot of people like. Andra, what about you?
I'll disappoint you because I have no sourdough pizza books at home.
Okay.
Literally zero. There's nothing on my list, nothing I can recommend. But obviously, in most of the sourdough books, you have different recipes.
Yeah.
So you'll definitely have some pizza
There's a
options
pizza
out
and
there. It's
tartine.
not,
There's
yeah.
like, okay. All right. So
Yeah.
Brandon, we now know what to get Andra for the holidays. It's like,
All right.
You're sending over Slow Rise. I'm sending over a pizza book.
Amazing. I have a pizza oven, but I don't have a pizza book. So
You're going to get flooded with books now, I think.
amazing.
It's an interesting answer because I think, people get in a rut and they like bake their thing over and over and over. But I think everybody who you're baking for secretly wants pizza. And so if you're not currently baking pizza, you should consider it. I got a backyard oven last year for the holidays, and like I kind of like started to bake. So I kind of explored a lot of the pizza books. The one that I feel like is my favorite, just overall, is Mastering Pizza by Mark Vetri. This one is great because, kind of to your point, Andra, where you just kind of look for a method and try to understand things. I learned one important thing from this, and that is hydration matters when you're moving from a home oven to an outdoor oven that's at a much higher temp. So if you're working at like 800 something degrees, 900 degrees, lower hydration actually is helpful because it's cooking so fast. It doesn't always have time for it to get all the water out of it. So you can end up with these like burnt, mushy pizzas. Whereas if you're in the home oven, having a little bit more water at a lower temperature, 450, 500, whatever, 550 you're working at Fahrenheit, it gives it a little bit more time to kind of like let it loose. And he kind of talks about like his recipes are really broken out by hydration, 60%, 70%, whatever kind of hydration dose. And he hits a lot of the classic styles. There's some other books, I think, if you want more of an encyclopedia of styles that exist. But I think this is, for me, the one that I would always recommend first for most people. The Sourhouse Cookbook we give away. We included a pizza appendix this year with the update we just put out. And the one thing I always recommend people is like, if you can bake bread and if you have dough, you have pizza dough, and you can just kind of make a little extra what you're already doing with Vanessa's book, tartine, perfect loaf, whatever. You can keep it in the fridge, and then you can just like toss some toppings on it and stick it in the oven, and you have pizza. So it doesn't have to be complicated, but it's certainly fun to explore the styles and whatnot of that space.
And I love that pizza has become a little bit more artisan craft that people are interested in, kind of like sourdough bread baking, or even, people making their own homemade beer, or kombucha, or anything like that. It's just other fermented products have just taken off at home. And I think pizza is one where, I was in Puerto Vallarta in Mexico last December, and there's a sourdough pizza place there that inspired me to make like a Roman style sheet pan pizza recipe because it was so delicious. And it was like, of all places you wouldn't expect in Mexico necessarily to be making like really excellent, Roman style sourdough pizza, but it was like some of the best pizza I've ever had. And it's just really cool that even, beyond bread, that pizza has kind of even taken off in a way. I think it's just really great for the sourdough movement.
Yeah, that's a good point. And a lot of, I think if you look around in the United States, in LA, pizza hubs, there's a lot more sourdough pizza happening. So people are going to be itching for the sourdough pizza book,
yes.
If they love pizza. So go give the people the cookbook that they want. Okay, so people are making a lot of bread, but we can't, as much as we'd like to think that we can live on bread alone, we cannot. For the person who's looking for more ideas for something to eat with their bread, what do you recommend? Andra, what do you think?
I have no clue, Erik.
Okay.
Like, I'm not into cookbooks other than sourdough bread, so I...
Whoa, you're such a purist.
I won't be able to say anything. I'm not a great, I don't enjoy cooking, so is my husband, and we usually just play around with it. But
Interesting. All right, Brandon, give her some help. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about different grains and ways to use them. So Joshua McFadden, who is the author of 6 Seasons, which won like the James Beard quite a few years ago, a James Beard Award, he has a grain book that I really love, and I think people don't talk about it enough. But it's kind of grains for 6 seasons, and so it uses like barley and quinoa and rye and whole wheat and all of these different kind of whole grains and how to introduce them into your diets in other ways. So I mill my own flour sometimes, so I always have some whole wheats and wheat berries and other grains around the home, and that you don't even have to mill them all the time and that you can learn to cook with them and make recipes with them. I think that that's a really great book for that. And one thing that I really like is that all of his recipes are written seasonally. And that's how I really like to cook is we have a garden and I like to write my recipes and the things that I'm writing and getting at the grocery store. I'm inspired by the seasons, and I think that he does a really good job. And so, for an example, like he has lots of salads, he has like pilafs, he has like other desserts, he has pizza, but they have like pull-out sections. So it has a long, big kind of almost like a poster that you can pull out, and it will say like, okay, here's a grain bowl for 6 seasons, and it'll give you all of the different styles that you can make with whatever is in season with you wherever you are. So I think that that's a really great one. He has recipes that use flour, so he has like English muffins and pizza dough, as I mentioned, and some other ones like that. But it's one that I go to all the time for just grain bowls and dinner recipes, salads, snacks, that type of stuff. It's a really great holistic book on grains.
Okay, that sounds like a good one. So Andra, there's an option, but another one that I'll toss out there that is very close to our core bread topic, but has a lot of good add-ons because a lot of obviously a lot of the bread books we're talking about usually has some obligatory things to eat with bread at the end. But I think Flatbreads and Flavors is an older book. It's described as a baker's atlas, one James Beard years ago, but this is focused on it's sort of like a trip around the world looking at the flatbreads of different cultures, and I think that's fascinating because I think not only is sourdough bread, but like flatbread is bread for a long time, and again for that new baker who really, if they don't have a lot of goals like in terms of the kind of bread they're making, flatbreads are a great way to start. Not a lot of sourdough in this, so you would have to convert things in this book, but each bread Crook goes across Asia, talks about the Nordic countries, South America, like each of these regions, it has like a recipe or two to pair with the bread, and so you kind of get that sense of like cultural context for the style of bread and a little bit of that kind of history. And in general, I always feel like Indian food is a good option for things. And not only for people who want to try making naan or chapatis or different kinds of the kind of like classic Indian flatbreads, but like even just that slice of the, your country loaf, I always feel like is like an underrated vehicle for eating some sort of Indian curry or something like that. So I'll toss that onto the pile of books that we've created today. Brandon, we've heard what Andra needs on her shelf, and but Brandon, what are you hoping somebody's going to give you this year?
Wow. I think, the pizza, I think diving into the world of pizza is definitely exciting. And I definitely want to get that outdoor pizza oven one day, Erik, like you got. I think that would be nice to add to my collection of things that I probably don't actually need, but
hint.
Definitely really won't. Yeah, if anyone's out there
Brandon needs an oven.
I do. But the thing about pizza is just, it's so communal. And I think that having a pizza oven is just a really great way to just invite people to your home and be like, we're cooking up the oven. And even if it's the middle of the winter time and it's cold outside like it is here, sometimes I think that that's like just something fun to have to talk about and to just commune around, which is what food is about. And I think that that's why so many of us get into bread making or love cooking or baking anyways, is just sharing with other people. And so I think exploring that would be really fun for hosting and parties and get-togethers and family time.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of my favorite things is to fire up a super hot pizza oven when there's snow on the ground. And so you have that like real contrast of like hot and cold.
Fire and ice.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, all of us food people and bakers are coming together around is making food, sharing food, enjoying it. And the holidays is a great time to do it. And the holidays is a great time to discover some new options. So I appreciate you all putting some thought into it and sharing these tips for new bakers and kind of celebrating books as kind of vehicles for the food culture that we're all part of. So, obviously you all yourselves do a lot of educating. You have a lot of great resources on your various platforms. Brandon, if people want to learn more about what you do, where can they find you?
Yes, so you can find all of my recipes, guides, and tips on sourdoughbrandon.com. That's what they're all listed, and you can find all of that also on social media at Sourdough Brandon on Instagram and Facebook. That's where I'm mostly posting all of my new recipes and roundups of all of my seasonal and exciting new recipes that I'm always coming up with, and also like tools and things like Goldie that I love to share with people. That's a really great place to find all of that for home bakers.
Awesome. And Andra, what about you? Where can we find you?
Sourdough Explained, definitely on Instagram. That's my channel, and this is where I put a lot of effort in actually explaining people all about sourdough making, bread making, rather than creating recipes. I mean, you can find some recipes, but even when you look at my profile, they are very much skewed towards the people in the UK, because obviously I use British flours, but most of my work goes into actually explaining. That's why it's called Sourdough Explained, because I like the helping people to understand what happened behind, rather than just following instructions that anyone can write in the. I mean, I can write, and Brandon is writing recipes, and everyone is writing recipes. But yeah, I organize classes virtually as well as in person in London. So we'll deep dive into the sourdough bread making.
Come check it out. Both these folks, great resources for learning to bake, whether you're a new beginner or trying to up your game and to become a really great baker. And of course, if you want to learn more about Sourhouse, you can find us at sourhouse.co or on Instagram at life@sourhouse. I'll be popping our updated link to our gift guide here in the bottom of the podcast feeds and stuff, but you can also find that on our website, whether you need a cookbook or some tools for a baker in your life. And thanks everybody for coming on and chatting.
Yes, thank you for having me, Erik.
Thank you. It was great.